welcome to this Q&A video. If you're new here, my name is Siobhan and I've just started to kind of revamp my YouTube channel, and so I thought it'd be a fun time to do a Q&A. What I will say is if you are connected with me on social media, then you know I also have a podcast, and what I did was I ended up doing a Q&A episode on my podcast. And so I thought, why not kind of repurpose some of the questions that I received for the podcast and share them here and have more of a visual experience and get to know each other a little bit better, because this is kind of my first time re-entering the world of YouTube in a more kind of like authentic way that I feel really comfortable with. I feel like in the past I have explored different ways of expressing myself, but this is really the first time that I feel that I'm really being myself online. And so I thought it would be a good time to kind of go a level deeper and get to know me. So we'll just dive right into the Q&A. I have kind of categorized them into a few different categories. The first category is kind of like spirituality / wellness. Then we have more like lifestyle questions, just general things about, you know, friendship and that sort of thing. Career related questions, which I also really love talking about. And then relationship, and then just like one or two random ones. So the first question that I got asked was about affirmations, and basically like, what are your favorite affirmations? What I will say about affirmations is honestly I am not the biggest fan of using affirmations. My assumption if you are using affirmations is that you're trying to manifest something or create a reality for yourself that you're not currently experiencing, and my personal perspective is that there are far more effective ways to create the reality that you desire. The reason that I'm not a big fan of affirmations is quite often we're encouraged to select affirmations that are not resonant with where we currently are. So for example, trying to go from I am poor to I am rich is like a huge leap. It's a huge identity shift, and while that may be possible for some people, I always felt like it created more inner tension to try to convince myself of something that I so strongly didn't believe. When it comes to affirmations, I like to select things that are more believable to where I am now and more close to where I am now. It doesn't mean that that's where I'll stop, but that way I can experience this state of expansion rather than feeling defeated because I really just don't identify with the affirmation that I'm trying to use. What I think happens when we try to reach for affirmations that really don't resonate with where we are now, we create more tension because we resonate more with the absence of the thing that we're trying to create than the actual thing that we're trying to create. So an example of something that I would do instead of trying to go from I am poor to I am rich, I would probably reach for something that feels more natural, feels more accessible, and that my body and my system isn't immediately saying no to. So something like all of my financial needs are met, or I have more than I need, or something like that. And then you can continue to expand to the point where eventually maybe saying something like I am rich actually feels resonant with you and with who you are. The next question is, how did you / are you building your self-love and self-confidence? I would say that the biggest way that I'm building my self-confidence is by bringing more attention to who I'm being and how I'm showing up rather than external validation that I'm receiving. I took kind of a shift in the way that I relate to things like manifestation and reality creation, and I've really begun to just focus on who I'm being and the character that I'm playing and trying to be in congruence with the reality that I desire. And I find the more evidence I have that I can create this shift internally, the more confident I feel. Because when I'm so attached to external validation, so things like how many likes I'm getting, how many views I'm getting, how many followers, when I'm so attached to that and so much of my self-worth is wrapped up in that, it means that it's very influenced by fluctuations. So if, for example, I have a couple of weeks where maybe my content isn't performing as well, or, you know, I'm not receiving the validation that I'm used to or expect or desire, then my self-confidence goes down. And what I've really been focusing on, which is of course a process, is internalizing my self-worth and internalizing my self-confidence and not relying on things that are outside of me, especially things that are unpredictable and variable, to validate me. So that's how I would say I'm building my self-confidence, and of course it's a process, but I have not only found that creating that experience from within has improved my self-love and my mental health as a whole, but I've also found that it's really influenced my reality creation / manifestation experience, because I've been able to come back into how I intend to relate to my reality versus allowing my reality to influence how I feel. That has been a really interesting shift that I've made, and I've noticed a lot of positive change from that as well. What are your morning and evening routines? I used to be a very regimented, routine person, especially when I was really struggling with anxiety. The point that I've gotten to now, which I'm not necessarily saying is good, but I just want to be fully honest, is that I'm very unroutined. I'm not sure if that's a word, but I don't really have a morning routine. I don't really have an evening routine, at least nothing that is like strict and regimented. That's because just as an individual, I feel that the more routine and regimented that I am, the less creative and like flowy and just good I feel. With that said, I feel that if I open it up too wide and I have no structure and no routine whatsoever, the opposite is also true. I start to feel overwhelmed, I start to feel ungrounded. I would say that in terms of my morning and evening routines, I generally try to get outside, go on a walk in the morning or in the early afternoon. I like to spend some time reflecting if I feel like it, and I really don't put a lot of pressure on myself for that to be like a certain amount of pages that I need to fill out in my journal or a certain amount of time that I need to meditate. That approach for me didn't work, and I know it works for some people. What works better is if I feel like journaling on a given day, I'll do it, and if I feel like meditating on a given day, I'll do it. And of course, if you're watching my YouTube channel, then you know that's something I have been trying to do, which I have been having varying levels of success with, is to try to stay away from social media in the morning, just to create more of an intentional projection throughout my day, meaning that I don't want to allow something outside of me, going back to what I said about self-confidence, to inform the way that my day is going to go. I want to set the tone for myself. But like I said, setting the tone looks different every single day. I would say one evening routine that's pretty consistent is we almost always come into this room, me and Jamie, and watch something on the projector. That's like our little ritual, our little routine, and we love it. What are your favorite ways to move and feel good in your body? As of recently, I've been having a bit of a tricky time with movement and exercise, I would say for the last few years. I recently was diagnosed with sleep apnea, which helps to explain a lot of why I've had a tricky relationship with exercise. Not necessarily from an emotional standpoint, which is also true, but more so from an actual, like, my capabilities in exercise have been greatly reduced because I have like zero energy. You know, if you don't know about sleep apnea, I talk a lot about that on my TikTok, so you can check that out. But essentially, I'm not getting a proper good night's sleep, which means that I just have such low energy throughout the day. That has definitely taken a hit on my self-confidence and my ability to like exercise at a higher intensity. But that's okay, that's where I'm at. And what I've really been resonating with is just walking. I've gone in and out of phases with the gym. I ultimately think that I don't really enjoy going to the gym, depending on what it's like. We were in Mexico last week and the gym there was so lovely and it was quiet and there was hardly anyone there, and I really enjoyed that. But for the most part, it's not an environment that I necessarily feel that comfortable in, and I prefer being outside and just walking. So generally I'm a pretty low intensity person. We'll see what happens when I start to get some more answers and some more therapy for my sleep apnea. Currently I'm using a CPAP machine, and my hope is that I have more energy to be able to do a little bit more high intensity things. But for right now, I love walking, I really like hiking, and those are the two main ways that I'm moving my body right now. What would last year you be most surprised about this year you? I would say that last year me, where I was, that version of me would be very surprised by my relationship with money. That is something that I've been working on for a couple of years, is not only my relationship with money, but also my relationship with my career. I never thought that I could get to a point where my career felt like a natural extension of me, that I really enjoyed the way I was spending my time, and that I was actually well resourced financially for doing work that I love. I grew up with a lot of kind of limiting beliefs around work, and I thought that it had to be unenjoyable, it had to be hard, you had to be like really struggling, and it wasn't meant to be enjoyed. I've been really unlearning that, and a lot of that ties into what I've been doing with Design Your Character, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically a process of being able to identify the character that you would like to play in life, not the one that you were taught you had to play, and then beginning to actually embody that character. And the way that I've been doing that has been by focusing on the core values of freedom, ease, and abundance. And by starting to shift into that character, I actually have really experienced a huge shift with the way that I relate to money. Not just because I've been actually receiving more money, but because the relationship dynamic between me and money has been much easier. this is something that has caused me like so much anxiety throughout my entire life. So to be able to actually shift to where I feel pretty comfortable and confident with money is huge for me. And I would say that me last year would be so grateful and happy that I had gotten to this place. Things you crossed off your 2022 resolution list. So like I mentioned, this year was a lot about shifting my relationship with my career. I'm definitely not really a resolutions person because I feel like when I set resolutions, I try to take on way too much and then I end up just checking out altogether. I am more into, again, going back to this idea of design your character. I'll focus on one area of life. So this year was career. I'll then identify what my kind of core values are within that category. So mine, like I said, were freedom, ease, and abundance. And then I will start to identify what the version of me who is aligned to those core values looks like, and how do they speak, how do they talk, how do they spend their day, and then I'll start to align myself to that. So I actually did record a podcast episode at the beginning of this year talking about some of the shifts that I wanted to make. In terms of things that I actually crossed off that list, I had one intention to take the pressure off myself creatively, going back to the idea of freedom, having the freedom to express myself in the way that I wanted to, when I wanted to, not feeling bad when I wasn't feeling as inspired, and just allowing myself to have a more fluid relationship with my creativity. And also, like I said at the beginning of this video, to be able to open up more of my authentic self and not feel like I always need to be putting on like a show. And I would say that that has been something that I've definitely really embodied this year. And of course, there's always room for growth. There always is that element of feeling a little bit removed from who you really feel you are when you're on social media. But I do very much feel, especially with YouTube for some reason, that I am a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident, and a lot more authentic. Another one was be more cyclical with my career. This intention came forth when late last year I had a death in my family, and what I noticed when I was in that experience, because I kind of took myself away from work and was with my family for a while, what I noticed happening during that experience was I felt like I had to be like rushing back to work, and I was feeling like I was taking time out of my life to be there. And then I had this realization that I was like, this is my life, this is my purpose right now, this is where I need to be, and I need to stop thinking that my career is the center of my life and then everything else comes around it. I really shifted into being more cyclical, meaning that when life demands that I'm somewhere else other than work, that I allow myself to be okay with that and not feel like there's anything wrong with that. Or again, if I have lulls in creativity or periods of time where I'm feeling like I just want to kind of retreat and be a little bit more restful, thinking about my creativity and my career more in a seasonal way, that was one of my intentions, and I would definitely say I am embodying that a lot more. I will say that I still do put a little bit of pressure on myself when I'm in those lulls, because I feel like I'm just a little bit insecure or anxious that I won't have the high again. But because I've started to have enough of that cycle, it's like the seasons, you know that winter is going to come to an end eventually. I have started to notice that within my work. When I have those lulls, when I have a low, it always comes back up, and I just need to kind of ride it out and see the value in every single season. And then, like I said, another one at the beginning of the year that I had intended to start to embody was just being less anxious about finances in general, and really intentionally working on shifting my relationship with money. And I want to just share briefly, because I will be doing a podcast episode about money and like everything to do with that and my relationship to it. But thinking about being in a relationship with money actually helped me so much, because like if I imagine that money was a person, would that be a relationship that I wanted to be in? And what I realized is I felt very anxious about the relationship. I felt very clingy and desperate, and that wasn't a relationship that I wanted to have. So I really worked on how can I shift into a more secure, reciprocal, trusting relationship, and that has been something that has really shifted a lot for me this year. Okay, so the next thing is in the category of kind of lifestyle, and the question is, how do you make friends as an adult? Now, I've moved around quite a bit in adulthood. I was living in Ottawa for university, and then I left and went to work at a camp for a bit, a summer camp, and then after that I went and taught English in Thailand, and then I moved to my home in Ontario, and then I moved to Vancouver. So it's been a lot of adjusting and kind of finding my stride again in friendships, and I certainly don't have it all figured out. But I would say that there are two things that I have found to be helpful when moving to a new city. The first is actually very like simple, and that's just going on Bumble BFF. That's how I've met a couple of friends, and I feel like it's just not only a good way to meet people, but it's a good way to realize how many people are in the same boat. I felt like I was kind of alone in the experience of like being new to a city and not really knowing anyone, but being on there made me realize how many people are in the same boat. So whether it's Bumble BFF or there's a lot of like friendship groups sprouting in different cities. I know that there's one here in Vancouver for meeting new people, and I think getting yourself in those environments, whether or not you meet someone, is very validating because you can experience that you're not alone in that. And then the other thing is just like a little bit of, I hate to say networking, but like reaching out to people in your community that you know who might be connected to someone else who lives where you live. Or like, for example, for me, I just had to get over my fear of reaching out to people and assuming that people already had a friendship group all kind of like figured out, because there was this person from my childhood that lived in Vancouver. I hadn't really spoken with him for a really long time, but I knew that he lived here, and just being able to like overcome the fear that people like that aren't interested in friendship and whatever, and just reaching out and seeing what happens, that has also been really helpful. I do have like a whole podcast episode about adult friendships and making friends and some of the like struggles of that, so if you haven't already listened to that, that is also a good place to explore the topic of friendship. Tips on living with tricky roommates. I don't know if I'm the best person to be providing tips, because generally my approach in the past has been avoidance. I do think that there are people in life that like shouldn't really live together. I've learned that the hard way. I've had friends that I've gone into a roommate situation and then not been friends after that roommate situation, and I just think some of us aren't compatible as living companions, and I think validating that that's okay and not forcing things. I think that a lot of interpersonal conflict comes from like trying to force dynamics that just shouldn't happen, and I think one of those things is like living together. It's a very unique situation, and your home should be somewhere that you feel so comfortable and safe, like it's your own space, and I think part of that is being willing to say no to certain people if you know it's not going to create that dynamic. And then I think the other one is, of course, there are going to be situations, even if you really get along with someone, where you just have differences or you have conflict, and being able to confront conflict in a harmonious way with the objective of creating a more harmonious living environment rather than like trying to be right or like having all this resentment harbored. I think it's really important to address these things before we get all this resentment built up, because I think that's when we have those interactions that are potentially going to ruin the relationship or seriously impact the relationship. Favorite podcasts and YouTube accounts. I am not really a favorites person. I don't really have a favorite anything. I more have phases. I used to have like a bunch that I listened to, and then I just kind of go through periods where I'm like, okay, I don't like this anymore and I never want to listen to it ever again. Right now I'm listening to Synchronicity by Noah Lambert. I'm listening to Jessa Reed's podcasts. She has a couple, so I'll listen to those. Oh, and I do like Emma Chamberlain's podcast from time to time, and then also I like her YouTube channel. I enjoy her dad's YouTube channel. I like Hitomi. I like this person called Elsa's Wholesome Life. Anything that's like relaxing and comforting and kind of vlog style is what I like to watch. Okay, someone asked, I've always felt really intimidated by content creation. Have you ever felt this way? Yes, 100%. When I first started seriously content creation, which was about a year and a half ago, I was petrified. I would say that it took me a long time to actually build up the confidence to start doing it. I would say the things that I was afraid of at the time were fear of embarrassment, fear that people that I knew would see it and judge me, fear that like people that I knew in my immediate circle would think that I was weird, or like my relationship with them would shift, and then also just like the fear of creating something and trying at something and not necessarily being great at it, or like people not seeing it. And of course that's the growing pain that you go through when you try something new. Even with YouTube, this is like my entry into YouTube, and it certainly feels uncomfortable at times to be creating content that I haven't yet established much of an audience here, and so that can feel intimidating. But I do think that success in content creation requires being able to sustain periods of discomfort. Periods of discomfort of nobody watching your stuff, periods of discomfort of maybe people in your immediate community judging you, people you know making fun of you, whether that's to your face or behind your back. Not necessarily. I think you'd be surprised at how little people actually care, but there may be a little bit of discomfort because it's a new version of you, and putting yourself out there in any way is going to feel discomfort. How do you make sure that you are making time for all of your hobbies hobbies / interests and work. I think that I am in a unique position because my hobbies and interests are all very integrated with what I do for work. So if I'm knitting, if I'm making food, I can create content out of that. That is a good thing for me because I enjoy creating content. But the balance that I have to strike is not trying to create content out of every single aspect of my life and reserving some of it for myself. I am not someone who necessarily has an issue with filming a lot of parts of my life. Where I think it becomes an issue is when it becomes a little bit too curated and I feel like I'm trying to force something that isn't very authentic. And so I just have to be mindful of that balance. But otherwise I feel that I'm able to pretty easily strike that balance. I really don't associate a lot of my self-worth with my productivity, and I am really easily able to just relax and, you know, spend time doing nothing, reading, knitting, watching TV, which is something that I definitely didn't experience in the past. How are you able to step away from your full-time job and start working for yourself? I would say about like 2 years ago is when I knew that I wanted to do my own thing. I was working for a startup as an operations manager. It was an online business, so I was seeing a lot of potential in the online space and specifically in social media. I would deny that I was like interested in a career in social media because maybe I felt that that was cringy, and it wasn't until I was like, no, I actually really want this. I can see the potential. It makes perfect sense for my personality, and I allowed myself to want that. I started to make moves towards making it a reality. I actually never considered TikTok or anything like that. I was mainly posting on YouTube for a while, not really getting a lot of traction. And then in around April of 2021, I just decided to try TikTok. It was actually my sister and my friend who were like, what if you just did this? Like, see what happens. So I actually didn't even have an account before that. I wasn't using it, but I started posting pretty regularly, and that's what I would say was the catalyst for starting to actually like gain some traction online. During that period, I still was working full time, but what ended up happening was I started to feel more and more confident with myself and with my career future in social media. Around June, I believe, or July of 2021, I decided, without a lot of actual proof, that, you know, I wasn't making a ton of money off of social media or anything, but I just had a lot of faith in myself, and I just decided like I would like to give this a real shot. So that's when I decided to leave that job. I did gradually work my way down to part-time, which was really good for me because it gave me a bit of time to kind of like get things going, and also was really helpful for my nervous system. So then I was like fully doing my own thing, and then I got really anxious about money. I ended up getting a little part-time seasonal job, just working like 2 days a week at one of the local mountains, and I also took on a little bit of digital marketing freelancing on Upwork. Did that for a bit, and then my social media really started to like get some more traction. I learned a little bit more about brand partnerships and how to charge for that, and like how to make actual good money through that. And at the same time, I started creating my own offerings like Design Your Character, the Notion template, as well as the manifestation quiz. And then from all of those kind of things combined, all of these like different moving pieces, I also have my podcast and my Patreon. Then that actually started to take off in a way that I could like let go of the digital marketing work, let go of the seasonal work, and just fully do my own thing. That was as of like, I would say 5 months ago, as I have been just doing social media. Okay, relationship questions. Do you ever get relationship anxiety? I don't feel that I have like a huge amount of relationship anxiety, although at the beginning of our relationship, Jamie, my current partner and my fiance, is the first like long-term relationship I've ever been in, and I definitely had like this fear of not necessarily commitment but of like permanence, and so that would kind of make me anxious initially. Of like, I am generally someone that likes to have a lot of freedom in just being able to like up and go. I've always been very independent because I've never had a long-term partner before Jamie, and so there certainly was like a growing pain at the beginning of like, this is a commitment and this is a long-term thing. It was never any question of like me not wanting to be with him long term. It was just an adjustment for sure. And I think just learning that like that's okay to have, and there's nothing wrong with you if you have those feelings, that was really important for me to know, because I think my black and white thinking and I tend to sort of think in extremes would lead me to be like, oh, I'm feeling this kind of like anxiety, I need to leave. And so learning that it's okay to feel that way, and it's normal to also have periods where you drift apart, and it doesn't mean that you're not meant to be together, that has been really helpful in kind of soothing that anxiety that I feel. And also being with a partner who is understanding of like, I'm a very independent person, sometimes we just kind of like drift apart, and it's not a bad thing. It's okay. And learning not to like make those periods of time mean anything beyond just like you need your space. How did you know you were ready to be engaged? I don't necessarily think there was a specific point in time, but to be honest, ever since I've started dating Jamie 4 years ago, I knew that he was the person I was going to be with. I just had this feeling, so it was kind of only a matter of time before we kind of made a decision. I will say that like both of us at the beginning of our relationship were kind of convinced that we would never get married or never be engaged. Like we didn't have any interest in that. We knew that we'd be together, but we didn't have any interest in like formalizing that in any way. But then, I don't know, something shifted about a year and a half ago, and you know, I think it was just a way of having some sort of milestone and having like a symbolic experience for our relationship, less so about like the actual act of being engaged or being married. And a lot of people have asked us when we're getting married and like what our wedding plans are, and we do not have any as of yet. That's actually the next question, which is any wedding plans / inspo yet. I'm curious to see your style. I do have inspo for sure if we ever do decide to do it, which I know is kind of weird because we are engaged, but we just really want to make sure that that's something that we really want to do. Not necessarily being married, but like having a wedding, just making sure that that's like aligned, and right now it's just not a priority. But I will share some of my like inspo pictures here. I have a whole Pinterest board. I would say that like my style is kind of like, or our style is low-key, rustic, outdoorsy, cottagecore-y, and just like relaxed and chill. And then the last question is super random, but it says, where is the gray tank from? And I wore the tank top for the video because that helps to show you what they're talking about. I've mentioned before is from Walmart. So that concludes my Q&A. I hope that you enjoyed this and you got to know me a little bit better. It's so nice to be here and to be able to have this relationship that we're forming together here on YouTube and on the podcast. So if you're a listener there also, then you may have already heard some of these, but thank you regardless for listening. So that's it for today's video, and I will see you in the next video.